Oh, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. I'm your old pal, Dan Shaheen. Oh, man, today we've got some exciting stuff. So exciting, I had to prepare extra special effects. Oh, my gosh. We got to get ready. How are we going to do this thing? Let's get ready to talk about Invisible Men by Ken Quattro. This is the story of Black artists in comics. I talked a little bit backstage to Ken, and we talked about the distinction. We're going to get together today, and we're going to talk comics. We're going to talk about his book, and we're going to talk about, anything under the sun relating to comics, as usual. As usual, I want to thank you for supporting this channel, watching. This is crazy talk. Being a part of this thing and helping support Comic Book News. You've been liking, subscribing, joining. The channel is growing and growing. I mean, it could grow faster, but could sure grow a lot slower too. We've got a lot of support. If you like watching videos about comics, about the kind of comics you're not really seeing on a lot of other YouTube channels, you're in the right place. If you've got comics, if you make comics that you want to see on this channel, you want to see them where on the $1 Million Comics Cam, what do? You send them in to the $1 Million mailbox. Where's that? Oh my gosh, it's right here. Comic Book News, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. Beautiful Arcata, California, I forgot to say. Send your comics to me. We'll spread them out. Now, does that mean you have to be an amateur comics maker, whatever that means? No, I get books from publishers around the world. Fantagraphics sends me big old boxes of books, and we looked at some of them recently, including in our last $1 Million mailbox. You got to see the first look anybody got to see at Barry Windsor Smith's Monsters, a 368-page 40-year in the making epic story. I mean, it's really mind-blowing in its scope and its breadth and the story that it attempts to tell. And I think it succeeds magnificently. It's going to sweep the Eisners in 2021, as Larry said, because I went back to look at it. Larry asked me who was the letterer on Monsters. And I looked, and it's like, there's one name on Monsters. It's Barry Windsor Smith, every single thing. And it's a tour de force of storytelling, rendering, lettering, and every other stylistic choice that makes it an incredible work. I recommend you getting it when it comes out in April, and just get ready to get blown away. today we're going to bring in Ken Quattro, and Ken and I are going to talk about his awesome book, Invisible Men. I've got it right here. It's floating in the studio. We'll take a look at this puppy on the $1 Million Comics cam as well. Oh, that's cool. And we'll talk to Ken. He's been a collector for a really long time. He's one of those vintage guys who knows the old stuff in and out, but he's also a really great writer and researcher. He went so in depth in so many ways in this book that I feel bad that I'm wasting your time not talking to Ken and not letting you hear from Ken. But hey, it's my show. What are you going to do? I'm just kidding. Let's bring in Ken right now. Without further ado, let's talk to Ken Quattro. But first, I want to show a little trailer, a little taste, a little bit of what this is all about, and then we'll bring Ken in to talk in just a second. Let's check out the trailer for Invisible Men from IDW and Yo Books. Wow, Ken Quattro, welcome to Comic Book News.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I love the intro.
I loved your intro. That was haunting and evocative. I'm just going to say it when you use those words.
Well, the song is really I think that they used the music from Strange Fruit, the
Billie Holiday
famous protest song. Yeah, right. And just use different lyrics. But yeah, it evokes a lot of what goes on in the book.
It's beautiful stuff. That's a beautiful book. We don't see too many. We're seeing more and more, I guess. We're seeing publishers utilizing video trailers and stuff like that for books. I'm glad to see it. IDW is forward looking in that way, I think.
Yeah.
So how did you come to work with IDW? How did Invisible Men come to be?
Well, okay, there's a couple different stories here. The book itself came by way of Craig Yo. And I've known Craig for years, and he's published some of my other articles and stuff in some of his books. And we've always been in contact, helping each other out with different projects and things like that. And finally, a few years ago, he asked me if I had any book that I wanted to do myself. And I told him about, I've had this long and making project I've been working on for, at that time, about almost 15 years, where it was concerning the Black cartoonists the first generation of Black cartoonists who worked on comic books back in the 30s and 40s. And even though there had been other books about Black cartoonists, nobody really focused on the ones who worked in comic books. And because it's almost like a specialized area. And that's why that's what my book is about, is those people that I identified. And there was basically, about 18 of them that I was able to identify over the 15 years. And, the book just evolved from that. And, it took several years to put the book together, but it was a process.
So I think you're making the distinction that there were other Black cartoonists in, say, comic strips or magazine comics that were more well-known. Because I'm trying hard to think of a Black comic strip cartoonist. I love comic strips too. Who would be an example of?
How about George Harriman? George Harriman, who did Crazy Cat.
Oh yeah, of course. You talk about him in the book, Crazy Cat. Yeah. Of course, going back to the most important original one. That's definitely that one blew my mind. I had no clue
Yeah, but he was one of those guys who passed for white, and he was never really acknowledged as being black during his lifetime. So it was, just over time in that people realized, that he was black. He was a Creole from, I believe he was from Louisiana, but he was one of those, early cartoonists, and he's outstanding. And then there was like E. Sims Campbell, who was one of the great early illustrators in that of, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and that did a lot of, Pretty Women type comics, I guess you would call it. And, there was other blacks, especially in the black media, who were popular. But there was only a handful, really, who made it into comic books. And it was a very unique situation that even allowed them to be there.
And even at that time, where comic, say, strip artists were fairly well respected, and comic book artists, right? Like, often were so disrespected to be a comic artist that good artists would use pen names like to distance themselves because they didn't want to cut themselves out of more legitimate work.
Right. Well, Will Eisner always referred to comic books as one rung above pornography, as far as like the amount of respect that they got. Because it was something that guys did, artists did, just to put food on the table. They're getting like $2 or $3 a page. And, it wasn't well-paying work, but the faster you were, the more money you would make. If you were Jack Kirby, you did pretty well. But if you were a sort of guy who could do 1 or 2 pages a week, that's not going to be, it's not going to cut it.
Sure. Let's touch, before we get into the comic guys again, I want to touch back on Harriman for a second and Crazy Cat, sure. Because like maybe people didn't take the time to recognize his heritage because they're just like, what is this thing that I'm reading? Like, what is this work of, crazy genius. The kind of comics that were coming out in that era, whether you go Winsor McCay or Harriman, it seemed like they came from like our future, let alone their future. You know what I mean? They were almost so ahead of their time. They were revolutionary. Well,
that's what makes a genius. A genius is a person who can see things that other people can't. They can envision things that other people can't. And that's what made Harriman a genius or McCay a genius. Is that's why they stood out. But that's why they were so well respected, because they even had the respect of the literati and everybody else at the time. It wasn't just comic fans. And most guys who were in comic books during the 40s, their ultimate dream was to be a comic book artist, or even a comic strip artist, I should say.
Right. Well, we've got people watching out there in TV land, guys. We're gonna have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. I'm gonna flash some of these "What's up" for some names we might know here. Long-time listener, Coffee Breath, watcher, Coffee Breath. What's up, Coffee? Guys, we'll have Q&A as always at the end. We'll have a dedicated section, so queue up your questions. Feel free to put comments in here, but we'll be talking. Ken and I are going to be talking face to face for a while, and I might not be looking at the comments. So save up any of those good questions for the end, or leave them in the comments, and I'll play them at the end, and we'll make sure to get answers for all of your questions. Oh, yep. Okay. See,
He's outstanding.
All right, so let's talk about your book, and on this show, we like to look at books. I talked about getting the PDF of Monsters, the digital version of Monsters from Barry Windsor Smith. To be honest, that's my one thing I was willing to make an exception for. I hate digital comics personally. I like them live. I like to touch them. I like to feel them.
That's part of the fun.
And, and we do that here. We got a special place that we do that here. That we like to call, what do we call it? The $1 Million Comics Cam. Here we go. Let's check it out. And I'll pop a PIM particle here and shrink down to size. And we'll check out Invisible Men. Man, first of all, it's a beautiful book to behold. Production values, beautiful. No dumb dust jacket. Can I just say thank you, Craig Yo, for a beautiful looking hardcover, a beautiful, gorgeous, high-end hardcover does not need to have a dust jacket to just get destroyed in the first 5 minutes that you read the book. Thank you, Craig. Let's look at some of the acclaim here. I mean, we saw some of the names, including a friend of the show and interviewee, Keith Knight, who was on this show, had really good things to say about your book. Talk about what it's like to work with Craig Yo and how, like, the book design, how much input do you have on that, or how much is this all Craig?
Well, like I said, it was a team project, really. Most of the images in the book were ones that I provided to him, but we had a pile of images to work from. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And when it came down a lot of times to the design, I left that up to him and Cleetia, his wife, because that's what they do. They're tremendous at what they do, and
they did a fantastic job.
Right. It was important to both of us, though, that we had a lot of images, because it's one thing, to write about an artist, but you really can't get a feel of, for what they do unless you could physically see it. And that's what we try to do with every single artist there. We provided at least one comic book story that they did, for each artist, but also additional images for other work that they did. Because every single one of these men did something besides comic books.
Right. Hopefully a lot of things.
Oh, yeah, they did.
So Stanford Carpenter, you mentioned to me before the show, he's going to be talking with you and Craig Yo when? Is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow night at, I think it's 6 p.m. Yeah, it's 6 p.m. tomorrow. We're on a broadcast from the Society of Illustrators. It's going to be me, Craig, and Stanford, and it's moderated by Calvin Reed from Publishers Weekly. And we're going to discuss the production of the book and some of the themes and obviously the artists involved. I'm really looking forward to it.
Let's steal all their thunder right now, Ken. Let's do it. Let's just suck the wind out of your presentation tomorrow.
Gee, thanks.
I want to say, like, just the feel. I'm just a fan of book production in general, and the little things like the type of the paper stock used, the type of binding, the way the book opens and lays flat are really important to me. And the first thing right away out the box, this is a high quality, really lovingly put together package.
Yeah, they did a great job.
I'm going to look through this. I'm in your, this is all in your introductory part, and you're going into more the history of comics.
Right there. Yeah. Adolphe Barreau was the first black artist to work in comics, but he passed as white, and he denied the fact that he was black. I mean, he totally gave himself a new name. He changed his biography. He changed where he came from. He claimed he was from Poughkeepsie, New York, when he's from Charleston, South Carolina. And he went as far as, like, he joined the Sons of the Confederacy.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, he was very conservative, and later in life he would write letters to the Charleston newspaper condemning the liberals in New York City and how much he hated them and stuff like that. Interesting guy.
Talented artist, for sure.
And he was, he worked for Harry Donenfeld's publications, his pulp magazines, even before he worked for in comic books. And he set up, was probably the first comic book studio meant to just produce artwork for comics. It was called Majestic Studios.
I mean, his storytelling is apparent just by without even reading them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a high level of craft, maybe, of just in the storytelling. I talk about this a lot on the show, that people like to think about artists in terms of, like, the type of rendering they do, or it's photorealistic or it's not, or whatever. But, like, the true comic artist, the true cartoonist, it's really is about storytelling, right?
Sure. I mean, that's what made guys like Eisner and Kirby and Alex Toth, so great, is their storytelling ability. Bernie Krigstein is another one. Just their storytelling ability and their understanding of the comic book page and what you can do with it is what made them so great.
Yes.
You know, like you say, that you can shake a tree and find anybody who's a great artist, but it's
That's
another
what I mean.
thing to be a great storyteller, and that's what you need to be a great comic book artist.
And then when you get that rare synthesis of both is when you get a truly elevated.
Right. And that's why there's only a handful of, you know, guys like that, in my opinion.
I mean, that's where I put Toth. I might even put Toth a notch. I mean, I put him a notch above a lot of people. It's hard to put him above Kirby, but I put him right up there.
Oh, me too. I love Alex Toth. I mean, I've got several pieces of his original artwork and stuff. I just love him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I knew we'd get along, Ken. That's just right.
This is
I'm just
all.
Gonna keep going. I'm just going to keep going through
Elmer Stoner's. Yeah, this is all Elmer Stoner's work. Stoner was the first black artist, as far as like acknowledging he was black, to work in comics. He started in 1939, and he served as a conduit for later black artists. He helped other black artists get into comic books. And to me, he was the most important of all the black artists because he sort of like opened the door for all of them. He broke the glass ceiling. Yeah,
dropping truth bombs. I love it.
Yeah, he worked that magazine. That comic you point to, The Challenger, was published by this progressive organization. It was attached to the Lutheran Church, and what it was about anti-Semitism, anti-racism, and everything. But it was a comic book that came out, I believe, in 47, 46. You got the date there. I don't have it in front of me. But Joe Kubert did some work with this comic too. But it was basically a work of Elmer Stoner, him and his wife.
I've never seen this before. This is a beautiful looking image. I don't even know if I've seen this one before. This post dates the famous Captain America punching him.
Yeah. This is, but he was the Blue Beetle artist for years. He did Blue Beetle for about 3 or 4 years.
Okay, I love this.
Yeah, that ran in black magazines and newspapers like Ebony and Jet, and it was in the 60s. And because he's so well respected, Stoner was a famous painter, fine artist in the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. And he just happened to work in comic books later on because, again, to make money, just like all these guys.
Yeah.
And in the black community, he was a highly respected artist. So much so that they even used him in Gordon's Gins ads later on.
It's weird to think you need an alcohol ad to add some legitimacy or something, but this was pretty meaningful, I'll bet, especially at that time.
Right.
To portray this image of sophistication and
right. Yeah. He was what a guy Stoner was.
Quite a drinker, I'm guessing too. He's that's
another cover he did. He did a lot of these things for Dell Comics.
So many images in here. I've never seen this one before.
That's Phantasmo. Oh, that's a great one.
I want to read more Phantasmo comics. Is he running around in just his drawers and a?
Well, there's a famous cover of Phantasmo that Stoner did that the coloring on it makes him look like he's totally nude. And that's in one of Craig Yo's books. He published it. We didn't want to use it in here.
Okay, we're gonna have to. Craig Yo, if you're watching this thing, I want you to come in here and talk to me someday.
I'll put in a good word for you, Dan.
Awesome.
Later on, that image up, the photograph on the other page was Waller Gibson, the guy who did the Shadow and everything. Who wrote the Shadow and all that. Well, he also did a comic strip, and he did it with Elmer Stoner. And they only did it for a short while together, and they ended up firing Stoner, but they were a team on that. And that painting there is of Stoner's wife. Her name was Henriette, and she would write a lot of the stories for Stoner's comics.
This is Stoner's painting here.
Right, yeah.
That's
he's
wonderful.
Wonderful painter. Like I said, you should see it. Unfortunately, we can only show so many images in these books, but unbelievable how talented these men were. He did a lot of, after he left Newsstand Comics, he went and he formed his own company to do commercial comics. And this is one he did for Jeep, like about 1946, we figure it was. There was no date on it.
I love these kind of comics too. I think Craig Yo's a fan of this kind of stuff too.
Oh yeah, that's another thing I've been helping Craig with, is he's doing a whole thing on giveaway comics. This is
right, let's bring him in for that. Let's bring you in too, man. That'd be awesome.
That's fine. I'm open to anything. This is one of the Blue Beetle stories that Stoner did, and just kind of gives a good idea what his artwork was like. It was kind of almost Baroque looking in some ways.
It's weird. Blue Beetle, the Golden Age Blue Beetle, seemed like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, Beetle was a popular character, but again, we have tendency just to focus on certain characters, like Superman or Captain Marvel or whatever. But
yes,
Blue Beetle was popular for years. He's still around today, and with DC.
But he's one of those ones that I almost put him on like a Captain Marvel level, in the sense that it wasn't a Marvel or a DC, but that achieved this really high level of popularity and mainstream. But I don't know, that never broke out of comics into other media like.
Well, Superman. He did though. But I mean, he was actually he had a radio show starting in 1940. Right. He was on the radio. Yeah, so it was never that big. He didn't reach the level of Superman or Captain Marvel in that, but he was a character that lasted a long time. That Reverend Ben story comes from one of those Challenger comics. And that gives you, that story there gives you an idea what was the material in those comics. Pretty interesting.
I love it. Look at panelless layouts, circular panels. This is not just like 9-panel dash it out quick stuff. No, this is thoughtful composition.
Oh yeah, like I said, a very talented artist. This here is Robert Pius. Robert Pius was another artist who came out of the Harlem Renaissance. He was, again, another respected artist and a teacher prior to getting into comic books. But like a lot of them, let me give a little background here real quick if I can.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration started a thing called the Works Progress Administration. Yeah. And the purpose of it was to employ people who had been losing their jobs, and people in areas of like art who, artists who had lost their jobs. So a lot of fine artists were employed by WPA. Robert Pius was one of them. And what they would do is, you'd end up painting murals on buildings, or murals, especially like in post offices. You can still find them today.
Yes.
In certain places. Well, Pius was one of those artists. Well, around 1939, 1940, Congress defunded the WPA, and so these artists were left without jobs. So a lot of these fine artists drifted into comic books because they still needed to eat. And unfortunately, as a fine artist, it's hard to make a living, with a consistency. I mean, I was an artist, and I can tell you that you can starve to death real quick. So Pius was one of the guys who got into comics, and he did some pulp work.
I mean, can you imagine a time when the government is going to pour resources into like art just to beautify bring art into people's lives, and to help support like something they viewed as important, which was the livelihood and the industry of these artists?
Yeah. I mean, that's what guys like Diego Rivera became famous and stuff like that. If you're familiar with his work. Anyways, Pius was known in the Black community in particular as a political cartoonist, and he did a lot. He's probably the most iconic political cartoonist of the Black media. But at the same time, he was working in comic books too. And he worked in comic books for a fairly long time, up until about the mid-50s, from about 1940 to the mid-50s. This is an ACG comic that he did.
This is very good-looking stuff. Well-rendered, well laid out, and beautiful-looking comics.
And again, he was a classically trained artist and everything. He was a very talented man. He has a painting of Harriet Tubman that's in the... No, he did a painting of Harriet Tubman that's in the National Gallery in Washington right now. That painting, that there is Rosa Parks that he did. That's what's in the National Gallery.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I really like those days when it was like comics was sort of like a gig. You didn't like grow up. like going, I want to be a comic artist, and you only read comics and you only draw like Neil Adams, like a guy who drew like Neil Adams. You might not even know who Neil Adams is, but you know what I'm saying. Whereas these guys were just classically trained, looking at a much broader variety and bringing those elements now into comics and elevating what was going on in comics. Right.
It was like I say, they were very, very talented men. J. Paul Jackson, he's from Chicago. He did most of his work for a black newspaper called the Chicago Defender. Matter of fact, that's where all these are from. But he ended up working on at least one comic book, and that was also published out of Chicago. It was Colossus Comics, but all this other stuff came from stuff that he did in the black media, like that Speed Jackson up in the corner there. That comes from a comic strip he did for Chicago Defender. And this character, Speed Jackson, in the mid-40s, in that particular continuity there, he went to a place in Africa and he found a lost civilization in Africa of an advanced civilization. In other words, he found Wakanda. But this is in 1944 he wrote about it. And it was about a 6-month continuity where characters in this place called Lastoni, he called it. But it's...
Well, is this the same artist here? I can't move so far with my eye because you can see a humongous jump in
right. He did,
just in like 4 or 5 years of working. It looks like, according to these dates.
That Home Folks there was a strip that he was trying to sell. He actually formed his own his syndicate to try to get it distributed in the early 50s, and it was distributed in some black media, but never crossed over to white media. But it's very similar to like. Some of the stuff you would see, like, what was it, like Out Our Way, and They'll Do It Every Time, and stuff like that, where they have multiple things going on and from like a bird's eye view.
Oh, okay. That's what I was going to say, is that it's an innovative kind of layout, and like you would expect just to panel gags,
right?
Or a much more beautiful, sophisticated way to look.
Very talented. He unfortunately died young, very young. This Yeah, he did that one down in the left-hand corner. There is a postcard. He did a series of postcards that they were like girly cards that came out during like World War II. It was really popular with the stuff.
Interracial girly. It says here it is in black and white.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
Yeah, and he did stuff for the government. See, during World War II, that one up in the right-hand corner there. That poster. During World War II, all these guys had to work under the Office of War Information, and everything had to be cleared by the government. Well, a lot of the work they did, they ended up doing a lot of cartoons and posters and stuff like that specifically were meant to help out the war effort. And he did some posters for him.
She promised she'd be true.
Yeah.
Love it.
And that was he did ads for years for this hair products company, a black hair products company that ran in newspapers for years, in black newspapers throughout the 1940s. And that and this here is the one comic book story that we can definitely say that he drew. It was in this Colossus Comics. It was published by Sun Publications out of Chicago. But look at the name of the character. Is Blonde Garth. Yeah, it was one of those white jungle gods and that, but here he was, a black man writing about this white savior of the black people. You know, it's just one of those weird indignities that they had to be, they had to suffer.
And again, very cool looking. I love comics. You can sometimes, you go into each panel and scrutinize, but it's when you lean back and look at pages and just look at the flow of the way something works. You can see where somebody's so talented. The talent jumps off of every page on these.
Oh yeah. I like those scenes there with the shark and that on those pages there. I thought he did that really well.
Yeah, really. These would be fun comics to read. And all right, let's move on to.
Okay, Owen Middleton's a very interesting man. He was a journalist, one of the first black journalists to work for a white mainstream newspaper in the early 1900s. But throughout his life, he kept getting in trouble with the law off and on. When he was like a teenager, he got in a fight with a bunch of white kids. They were all let go, and he was put in reform school. Then during World War I, he was a conscientious objector. But during World War I, you couldn't be conscientious objector. So he was thrown in federal prison at Leavenworth.
Right.
And he spent a couple of years in prison there. Then in the 1920s, he got in trouble a couple other times, one for passing a bad check. Then finally in 1926, he went to jail one more time. But at that time, New York had a law that if you got convicted 3 times, it was a life prison. You got life in prison. So he was sentenced to Sing Sing prison for life. And he was in solitary confinement and everything else. But in 1930, Will Durant, who was a famous philosopher, had written a book called The Meaning of Life, where he contacted all these famous people from around the world to give their impressions of what they would say the meaning of life was. So he got Albert Einstein and Mahatma Gandhi and all these other famous people to write for this book. Well, he received a letter from Owen Middleton, who was in solitary confinement at Sing Sing, giving his meaning of life. And the book became, the letter became a sensation. It was published in newspapers, everything. And because of it, people wrote in and they got Middleton released from prison. And he ended up becoming one of the first social activists and everything in the 1930s. And he ended up getting into comic books briefly for several periods. He worked for, he did work that appeared in like Fawcett Comics, like Spy Smasher and that. And this is the one story I've identified so far that just his name on it. And it happened to be in a comic book that was mostly done by Elmer Stoner. So I think that, you know, it's an indication that Stoner was the one who got him the job.
Oh, okay. Now, I am a huge fan. If you know the show, people watch the show, I'm a huge fan of like technical comics, technical schematics, and like the crisscross between them.
Yeah.
And you know Elliot R. Brown?
Not off the top of my head.
He did in the Marvel handbooks and stuff. He did all the Quinjet diagrams, all that. He was called Mr. Technical at Marvel.
Okay.
And anyway, this just brings me right to him. Like this is that sort of thing where they wanted to bring a realism, and a reality to it.
Yeah, the comic was War Heroes. War Heroes number 5, I believe it was.
This is fantastic. This is really cool.
Okay, now these two fellows here, Elton Fax and George Lipscomb. Fax was the artist, and Lipscomb was a writer. He's actually the only black writer of comic books I've been able to identify. But Fax was another established black artist who ended up working in comics. And actually, him and Pius were close. They taught at the same school together at the WPA during the 1930s in Harlem. And a lot of times their comics would appear together in the same comic book and everything. But he did this. He did several famous posters for NAACP, and you can actually buy this poster right now, like online in different places, like on Amazon and stuff. This poster's been reproduced many, many times.
That's powerful imagery and beautifully.
He was a social activist too, and he was involved in a lot of stuff. And again, another talented man.
The art of poster art almost, it's not a complete overlap, but it really crystallizes a lot of skills you need in cartooning, to communicate a lot with an image that can just be easily absorbed by many.
Oh yeah, that's why you see a lot of guys like, say, L.B. Cole, who drew a lot of comic covers that looked almost like posters. It's very reminiscent of posters. Yeah. That Young Life comic up on the left-hand side there was actually published by a branch of the Communist Party. Fax was a communist. As a lot of these black artists, they had leanings. They wouldn't necessarily have, card-carrying communists, but
sure,
this was actually published by the publications arm of the Communist Party, American Communist Party, and they put out several issues of this comic called Young Life. Very interesting. And this is a long-running comic panel that ran in almost every black newspaper you pick up in the 1940s or 50s. you'll find a version of this by Elton Fax. He did it for years and years.
Fantastic. I love those kind of features. You don't really, definitely don't see those in the comic sections anymore. Those kind of info features.
This is a book he illustrated about George Washington Carver, and it happened to be written by George Lipscomb. And this is where he connects with George Lipscomb, who ended up, if you flip the page, you should see, ended up working for Classic Comics. George Lipscomb wrote a bunch of classic comic book adaptations. And that's where, they tie in there. But that poster, that photograph on the left-hand side, it includes both Pius and Elton Fax in that photograph. They were teachers at a school in Harlem, a famous art school. This was just one of his comic strips that ran in black newspapers called Jim Steele.
Yeah, and clearly he's drawn, I don't know, from maybe like an Alex Raymond style, or just
right. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times these comic strips, you can always see like a white variation. It was like they were doing like a takeoff on a famous white comic of the time.
Jim Steele, great strong name. We like that.
Yeah, and this was a comic he did for novelty comic. Well, it was actually ran in Target, I believe. Yeah, it was in Target Comics. He did Bullseye Bill for a few issues.
And working in other racial relations as well. It was a complex time in race relations in the whole world.
Yeah, well, that's why it's always interesting. You try to. You think yourself, what were these guys thinking as they were drawing these things? It's just, okay, this comic here, this Lion Master one, was an adaptation of a story written by George Lipscomb, and I'm pretty sure it was also drawn by Elton Fax because they did a lot of stuff together. But it was an adaptation from a book he'd written, and it actually appeared in a Jack Armstrong #1 comic of all things. It's pretty interesting, though, because it's entirely a story about a young black kid who becomes a man by killing a lion.
I love the camera angles going on in these.
That's a beautifully drawn story.
Really well done storytelling. Okay.
And the next one,
I'm going to say it. I got to pick a favorite. And the one that was a surprise. So let's talk about Matt Baker.
Yeah, like I said, I could talk about him all day. He's one of my favorites, and he's really the reason I even got into all this originally. Because
even his look almost reminds me of the way he draws.
Well, he was a very good-looking guy. That's his high school photo from 1940. He is from his high school yearbook.
Super smooth.
Oh yeah, and his work is very familiar to anybody who collects old comics. Like
everybody's seen this picture.
Everybody's seen it. Right.
And everybody, I never saw any of this stuff. I've not read that comic. I've seen that cover because everybody wants. Yeah. We know what they want this cover for.
Exactly.
But the insides. This is what I looked at this picture and I said, "Gosh, this is super, super beautiful."
He was such a talented artist. And again, he died young. He was only 37 years old when he died. He died of a heart attack in 1959. But a tremendous artist.
You could tell me this was drawn today by an artist like trying to sort of like use a polished style but evoke old comics. And I'd go, oh, yeah, Frank Cho or Dave Stevens did this or something. It's, wow, they're all looking at him, obviously.
Yeah, that's a cover he did. Look at that cover there, that Cinderella love cover. I mean, that's incredible. He did the work he did for St. John Comics in the late 40s and early 50s is incredible. And I mean, he was the reason why I even started down this path of studying all this stuff. It's incredible.
I mean, talk about the work that you didn't have to do in this to tell the story that this is telling, but the amount of extra work in all these places, this is not easy to pull off. It's beautiful. No.
Canteen Kate was another St. John comic he did. It's one of my favorites.
I'm hanging out with Canteen Kate. I'm sorry. She seems fun.
Yeah, this is that after he left comics, when St. John Comics folded, or basically when Archer St. John died in 1955, he lost his job at St. John Comics, and he went into illustration.
What year did he die? Did you say?
When you talk about Baker, Baker died in 59.
59. Because I go like, if he had just lived, I mean, he was the right age where he had lived. What a superstar of comics this guy would have been. Like, not that he's not, but an even bigger star.
Well, he was doing very little in comic books by the time he died, because unfortunately that was a bad time for comics. They were going out of business pretty much.
Yeah, true.
This here is probably the most important comic story in this book, I believe, because it's the first black comic book character to have his own feature in a white mainstream comic. And it was created by Matt Baker. And he ran in Crown Comics starting in 1945. But the interesting thing is, Dan, even while he was colored black on the inside, on the covers, he would appear white. They colored him white because they couldn't put a comic on the newsstands that had a black character in a positive light, especially in the South.
I knew I had heard of this. This is famous for that reason. Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah. But it's a wonderfully drawn story again. But
again, the panel work. This is where I get into, like, these were the days when it didn't have to be this good to be on the comic stand.
Oh no. But he was outstanding. He was just
so good.
It's a Phantom Lady story.
My new favorite Golden Age art. Now, if anybody asks me who's my favorite artist of that era, it's got to be Matt Baker.
He's right up there, I'll tell you.
Beautiful. I love it. I'm gonna definitely look into more of that. We need more Phantom Lady. I think they do still make Phantom Lady comics. Maybe somebody's doing it.
Yeah, and actually, his stuff has been reprinted a lot of times. I think there's been several books that have reprinted some of most of the Phantom Lady stuff.
Pretty sure it's public domain at this point. I think
it is.
Not?
Pretty much most of that is. Maybe Phantom Lady. I don't know. No, because Phantom Lady's gone. It's passed through several different publishers, so I'm not sure. Hollingsworth. Alvin Hollingsworth.
A knockoff version that they used because I think they want to get their own copyrights and whatever.
Right. A.C. Hollingsworth. Alvin Hollingsworth is another outstanding artist. He did a lot of different comics, and that's a horror cover he did, but he did
obviously EC knockoff style.
Exactly, that's an Avon comic. Yeah,
I've never heard of that before. And you look at it if you imagine looking at it from 20 feet away on the newsstand, you're like, oh, a new EC, I gotta go check that one out.
Yeah,
even with the little circle.
Yeah, that cover there. See, Hollingsworth grew up with Joe Kubert. They were friends from junior high on, and the felony files there was something they did together, and you can see the Kubert-esque kind of look to it.
Although I don't know if Kubert ever went into flipping panels upside down.
That was just because it was like the reveal at the end. It was like a mystery or whatever, but.
I thought it was Dave Sim who invented that technique in Cerebus, but it's not. Here it is.
Yeah. That was a comic strip he tried to sell in the 50s, which never sold. It's called Dorothy Tudor. It was about a black teacher.
Good looking stuff.
Yeah.
Nice. Looks like maybe done with a brush.
Probably. He was very talented. He went to, he got his master's in fine art and everything. Very talented man.
This is nice looking stuff. I think that at that time anyway, sad difference from today, there was just such a high level of craft expected on the comic strip page.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to denigrate Dilbert or anything, but
Bronze Man was one of the first things that he did on his own. That's a piece of original artwork he did.
This is great looking stuff.
Yeah, and then he got into fine art after he left comics in the 50s. Again, most of these guys they left comics by the mid-50s when the whole industry was sort of like imploding.
Sure.
And he became a painter, and he became a teacher. in New York City, art teacher. This was the right-hand page there is something that appeared in a girly magazine called High Magazine, or Ho, one of the two. But it was High and Ho. They were published by Bernard Bailey. But he did a series of sketches there. This was a Lena Horne comic from Jukebox Comics that he did back in the 40s, which is interesting.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
It's another zombie story he did.
Nice stuff. Now, so this was stuff, though, that this looks like a kind of easy. This was getting into the tail end of the horror craze.
Well, it was right during that whole period. I mean, everybody was taking their shot, And he worked for a lot of different companies at that point. Okay, these two fellas here. The reason why I combined these two together is they both went to high school together. Ezra Jackson was an outstanding student and everything while he was in school and everything, and he went on, to work in comics for quite a long time. Then there was Alfonso Green, the fellow on the right. He also was very talented, but he ended up in and out of jail, and that photo right there is actually a booking photo of him. Yeah. Anyways, this is a page. Ezra Jackson mostly worked with Maurice Whitman, who was a well-known artist. He did a lot of work for Fiction House. But early on in their career, Whitman and Ezra Jackson were a team. And they would sign the comics with a combination of their names, like a witty man and stuff like that. Sometimes they called themselves White Man. But they did a lot of work for all different companies and stuff like that. And I'm actually speaking with Ezra Jackson's daughter, who's Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston. I'm speaking to her on Friday, and we're doing an interview. So that should be interesting. That's up in the left-hand corner. That's something like Toth. And he talked because he went to school with both of these guys, and it's mostly about Alfonso Green. He was sort of like the main source of information about Alfonso Green, and he talks there a bit about the troubles that Green had, when he knew him as a kid.
How many other artists could you just look at the print, the handwriting, and go, "Oh, that's Alex Toth"?
I know. Well, I got a couple of those postcards and that I've gotten over the years, and it's very cool.
Oh my gosh, I love it. There needs to be a font. If there's not a Toth font out there,
that's actually a good idea. I like that. That's a good idea. Yeah. This is one of the stories that he did with Maurice Whitman. It was for Patches Comics called Secret Seven, and they actually included a black kid amongst a bunch of white kids, which was very unusual at that time, in like a club. But in that classic comic there was drawn by both of them. This here is the only story that bears Ezra Jackson's name solely by himself. Again, it was just like another mystery story.
Sentence of Death.
Yep.
Nice, clean storytelling. Well, comics were definitely more wordy back then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then these next stories are by Alfonso Green, who, he started out while he was Alfonso Green was so talented that he was hired by DC, actually All-American Comics, while he was still in high school to draw. But he kept getting in trouble, kept going to prison. And these are some stories he did later in the 40s when he was a little bit older for Heroic Comics. And that one story there from Wonder Woman, that's from Wonder Woman in History. We had to get special permission from DC to publish that. But it's about Sojourner Truth. And it's a wonderful story. I mean, the story itself is a classic. But he was the first, actually, we think that's the first story about a black person actually as a heroic character drawn by a black artist. So it's a historic story. Eugene Bilbrew is an interesting guy. He's basically known for all his pornographic work that he did.
That's all I know him from.
Everybody knows Bill Brew from his pornographic stuff. But before he got into it, he actually worked for Will Eisner. But even prior to that, he was in a band called the Basin Street Boys, which was actually popular during the 40s. They had a hit record or two. But he did Clifford after when Jules Pfeiffer was drafted in 1951.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I didn't realize he followed Jules. Talk about some.
Yeah, for the next year, he drew Clifford for Will Eisner after Jules Pfeiffer was drafted. But it's before he did all this pornographic stuff.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, what a transition. What a
I know.
Clifford is an all-time great. I really do love the Pfeiffer stuff.
Right.
Okay. Now, when I heard about this book coming out, this is immediately the image that popped in my head.
Right.
Talk about All-Negro Comics.
Yeah, extremely important comic. It was founded by Orrin Evans, who was a very respected journalist. He worked in for white newspapers, actually. And he worked in for like 30 years by the time he came around doing this. And what it was is he worked for the Philadelphia Recorder, and the newspaper went out of business in 1947. And when it went out of business, he lost his job. But him and several white editors of the newspaper got together, and they formed this All-Negro Comics publishing with the specific idea of putting out a comic book for blacks, made by blacks. And everybody who worked on it, those 4 people that I show in the photos there, is his brother and some friends of his from college. They all went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art school, and one other artist named John Terrell. And they got together and they put out this one comic intended just for blacks, but it didn't get very wide distribution. And the second issue, even though it was finished, was never published because the story goes that the paper companies wouldn't sell to them. They wouldn't sell them the artwork when they found out it was a black man who wanted to purchase it. So it was never published, but supposedly the artwork still exists.
I was going to say, this is one of the rarer Golden Age comics out there.
Yeah, very hard to find. Yeah.
Very, very difficult. It's because it's one of those double collectibles that's sought after by collectors.
Right.
Different segments of collectors.
Right.
Not just comics people.
Yeah, and this is just different it's artwork by the artist who worked on the comic. It goes.
I hate to interrupt, but we've got a $2 super chat. This guy spent $2 just to give it to us. Thank you.
There you go. Buy yourself
Didn't
a
even
coffee.
have a message. Cool. I that'll almost get me one these days. Okay, more these comics. Okay.
Right.
This is where your iconic kind of image from the cover came from. I was going to ask, where did that come from?
Yeah. That's Ace Harlem. It was a character created by Orrin Evans himself. It was drawn by John Terrell, and he was like the star of the comic book in that. If you see him, he's on the cover.
What makes this very different to me? This is why this is so important, and I think stands out so much. It's probably obvious for me to say, but where the other ones are like, oh, they're concealing that the character is black.
Right.
The artist, nobody knows. This is what they're going for. They are really trying to stay with this comic.
It's hard to even express what a statement that was on Evans' part to try to even dare to put that out at that time. Yes. Because believe me, it was there were still Jim Crow laws in a lot of parts of the United States. And, even just regular cities in the North and stuff wouldn't even put stuff on newsstands, if it had a black character on it. And, he dared to go out and publish his own comic book.
Totally. I just imagine being a black kid, who loved comics, who read
Oh, I
comics,
know.
and just never saw. Imagine it, Ken, if
Yeah,
you can.
yeah. Dan, they never saw a positive black figure in most of these comics. And if they did,
At
a lot
all, almost in any media for that
right,
matter, right?
exactly. So it was quite a thing. And you know, and for these black men to work in that media, you know, a lot of times they were forced to depict, you know,
Yes.
you know, white characters doing things like, again, like, you know, these Tarzan type guys,
Yes.
you know, stuff like that. How insulting is that? How degrading is that? The idea of that, you know, of a white jungle lord and all that stuff. But it's just,
this is why I love this kind of stuff, because it was it's not like we're not going to hide, we're going to show, right? We're going to
exactly. It was a statement.
This is James Brown.
A statement. Yeah.
This is James Brown. I'm black and I'm proud. You know, this is like
exactly.
You can't deny. I love it.
Right. An extremely important book. And these are just different characters from the thing. That's John Terrell in that photograph there. That's Lion Man, who was, again, now okay, that's John Terrell, but if you flip the page real quick, that Lion Man up on the left-hand side there, that was created by George Evans, which was Orrin Evans' brother, drawn by Terrell, we believe. And what it was, again, it flipped the script. It was a educated black man from Howard University who went to Africa, and he lived amongst, you know, the natives and stuff like that. But he was a very educated black man, and it wasn't, you know, the
imperialist fantasy.
Exactly right. You know, and so it was just a totally different flip the script kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's Ace Harlem right there.
I love that. I love that image. I'm really glad you chose that for the cover too. It's part of the cover.
Yeah. That's Ace Harlem.
Is great. This is so Dick Tracy. This is so cool.
Exactly. It's so much like a Dick Tracy story. It's pretty violent actually if you read it, but it's.
So was Dick Tracy.
No, I mean, yeah, it was. But that's how.
I loved it. Back in those days, it was like machine gunning people to death.
Exactly.
It was like,
oh yeah,
Sunday Comics page.
Yeah.
As long as they're criminals, that is.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is good looking stuff. Again, I think we're almost there. But yeah, you can just feel Dick Tracy as an influence for sure. Okay, and I'm gonna literally spoil it. We're gonna see it all, Ken.
Well, you just look at the pictures. You know, people have to actually read it too. There's a lot more to it.
And to be honest, I read multiple seconds. I haven't read it all yet. I looked at the pictures.
Yeah, and that this here is Cal Massey, who was the last of them to pass away. He actually just died about a year and a half ago. He was younger than these others, but he came around right at the end there. But that's a very famous painting he did. That has been reproduced many, many times. There's posters of it. And
Angel Heart. Oh, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, beautiful. And he was actually the main designer at the Franklin Mint for years. He designed a lot of their medals and did a lot of sculpture work.
Okay.
But a lot of
talk about being able to work at a size that needs to be reproduced and stuff like.
Yeah. But again, he worked in comic books for a number of years in the early 50s, mostly for like Atlas Comics.
Oh, okay.
Atlas and Stan Lee. Yeah.
This is top-notch stuff. He's very talented.
Yeah.
Look at that. Oh, this is great. I don't think I saw this one yet.
Oh, you look up Cal Massey online. You can find a lot of his work because he's still fairly recent. There's a lot of his stuff has been made into posters and.
This one I'm loving for sure. That is a great image.
Yeah.
Okay, but like anybody's a great painter. I really like when people that paint acknowledge a love of comics and go into comics as well and just bring a whole other level.
Yeah, they have a different eye than than other people do. Again, to me, because I spent a lot of time in art school. You could tell that these guys are coming from a different perspective than a lot of people who are just used to drawing comics.
Yeah, it shows here. These are people, that's what I say again, that like back in those days, if you could draw comics, you were somebody who could draw anything. And so people could write comics about anything and you could get them where, I'll just say charitably, not every mainstream comic book artist could say that about their own.
Yeah.
These days. All right, this is great stuff, man. We did the whole book, Ken.
Well, I hope people still go out and buy it, but
well, they don't have to now. I'm just gonna say right now. No, of course you have to buy it. Come on. Wait, I'm gonna pull back out here into the book room. We'll go back into regular mode here. Way over here. Awesome. And we're gonna look to the comments and see if there's any comments. But Ken, I want to say, how long? I don't think we talked about it before the show. How long did you work on this book? How long did it take?
15 years. Actually, over 15 years.
And what else are you doing during that time?
Oh, nothing. No, I mean, I do a lot of stuff. I mean, I've been writing about comics and comics history for about 50 years, since the early 70s. Okay. And I've written something like 7,000 articles, I think I have on my computer. A lot of my stuff appears online, but I've done stuff that's been in Alter Ego magazine. I've done stuff for Craig Yo. I wrote for Comics Journal. I wrote something. I was a historical consultant for the movie Professor Marston and the Wonder Women. I've helped out with numerous books with other artists that, I'm not really credited, but I'm a source. That's why they call me the comics detective, because I find a lot of this obscure stuff that nobody else even bothers to look for. It's kind of my thing.
I'll say, Ken, well, you brought a lot of it up here, and we got a lot of great comments here from people. One thing, we'll mention it again, Conversation on Invisible Men, Trailblazing Black Artists of Comic Books, with Ken Quattro, Stanford Carpenter, Craig Yo, Mario by Calvin Reed, and that's going to be tomorrow. You guys can find that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That should be interesting. Like I said, each one of those guys brings something different to the conversation. And like I say, Craig's showing himself, let me tell you. But and Stanford's brilliant, to listen to him talk. So it's really going to be an interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to it, I know.
Here's an old name from my past, Michael Jewell, old college buddy. Mike's not into comics, but he watches this show sometimes. And if he's watching still and says he'd buy this book, that says a lot.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Like I say, there's a lot more going on if you read it than just the pictures. But it's a combination. It was a collaborative effort to combine the images and the text.
All right, Jewel, your check's in the mail. Let's see. I've got one last question here. Is Cal Massey related to the jazz player of the same name?
No. If they were, they may have been distantly related, because they're actually, I think, from the same area. But this Cal Massey was from Philadelphia. Matter of fact, I think he was. Now that I think about it, I think there was a relationship, like they were cousins of some kind. But it's also confusing, especially when people look online. They'll find the jazz player, jazz trumpeter.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, but this Cal Massey was different.
Rich Danny's says, Ken, were you ever a member of the Comic and Fantasy Art APA?
No. I like I say, many of my friends are and stuff like that. But I've always kind of, done things on my own. I've, gone my own way and done my own stuff, and it worked for me just to do it that way. I'm kind of a solitary researcher and everything else, because like I said, Dan, I'm very obsessive about the way I do my research, and a lot of it's I go down rabbit holes that a lot of people just don't have patience to do.
I hear you. Well, it's a testament. This book is a testament to your hard work and all that digging, and I think it's beautiful enough. I see a lot of people talking about it. I see a lot of people really interested in this, and I hope it's gonna, take these invisible men and maybe give them some more visibility.
Well, I do too. I mean, that was the main reason why I did it. Is I wanted to, expose these men to the light. Bring them to light for people. It's just like with a lot of things in life, Dan. We have just one way of looking at things, and I try to just, show a different perspective. And a lot of what I write about, not just in this book, but just in general, is a lot of the tributaries that run off the field of comics, and not just, the main stuff that we always go over again. I mean, I love reading about guys like, Will Eisner and Jack Kirby and stuff like that. But there was so many others who worked in the industry, and there's so many other fingers and hands involved that, I want people to understand that. And that's what I do a lot of my research and writing about.
I'm going to say this would make a great PBS style documentary.
Well,
Ken Burns, if you're watching.
Well, let me tell you that I've already found out that Samuel L. Jackson has bought the book, and I guess he likes it. So who knows?
Awesome. I could see him being a great narrator for it as well.
There you
go. And if you want to, Ken, you come to me. We'll talk. We'll work together. We could make something like that happen, man.
Okay, well, we'll see. You never know. Like I said, I've had so many different people talk about, to me about this book. I've been exposed to. It's been an interesting experience because it's reaching a lot of people who have no interest in comics. And that's what I want. I want to elevate comics to a different level, not just our community, comic collecting community, but I want, the public, general public to be interested too. And that's, to me, is the most satisfying part of this.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you got to do it. And I'm glad you had the time to come here and talk to me today.
I enjoyed it.
I'm going to say there's a lot of people out there covering comics, but not everybody has the production values and special effects that we could bring to this thing. Come on, Invisible Men. And this was my pitch to you, but oh well. Yeah. I should have read the book more. I guess I would have understood. It wasn't literal. Anyway, Ken, I got credits to do. If you got time, stick around. We can chat afterwards. But if not, thank you so much for making the time. I hope you'll be willing to come back sometime if you ever want to promote anything or just talk about comics.
Sounds good. I love talking comics.
Hey, me too. Thanks, Ken. See ya.
Cool. Bye.
Hey, people. We're floating in a sky of heads. What's happening? Oh, my goodness. Folks, thank you for watching Ken Quattro. Interesting story. Interesting book. A lot of care, a lot of work. 15 years went into making this thing, and it shows. Everything right down to the binding, the introduction, the notes, and the comics selected for the inside. He turned me on to a lot of artists that even if I was cursorily familiar with, tertiarily familiar, I don't know, a little bit familiar with. And now I know a lot more, and I got a lot more to research and a lot more to read, especially Matt Baker. I think that's my new jam, is to read every Matt Baker comic I can find. Speaking of jams, you're helping to make this show jam just by watching. We got 9 people watching live right now, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch this thing. Ken's got a following. He traffics in some literati circles. I don't know if they're the type that's going to be down for Invisible Man shenanigans and antics or not, but I don't know, maybe. Ken was a good sport about it. You guys have all been good sports too, supporting this channel, liking the videos, clicking thumbs up. That really does help. If you liked our conversation today, click on that thing. If you haven't already, consider clicking on the button that says subscribe. And oh man, if you're one of those people that watches us every single time, I'm not going to beg you, but I'm going to gently suggest to you that you consider clicking that button that says join and picking one of the multiple levels of membership and support that you can have on this channel. You can see your name in the credits. You can have a title card if you want. A lot of things you can do, including for just $1.99 a month, less than a cup of coffee, you can see your name in the closing credits that I'm about to roll. But why would you want to do that? Who watches closing credits? Well, if you watch this show, you do, because at the end of the credits, we've got a little comic book movie style cameo, hand selected by myself, just waiting for you at the very end to entice you to watch the whole thing. So who have we got next week? I don't know. I had Andy Runton of Owly all lined up. for a couple weeks ago. He had to cancel. I'm trying to line him up. I got maybe Joe Field, a founder of Free Comic Book Day, who said he wants to come in here and talk about anything but Free Comic Book Day. I don't blame him. That's all anybody ever asked that guy about. So anyway, so we're going to have somebody on this show, but when will that be? It's going to be, as usual, next time.
That's all, folks.